Not only must there be love, but there ought to be respect. Verse number 5. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and then come together, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Love, her body belongs to you. Your body belongs to her. Respect, you ought to separate with mutual consent. You ought to respect one another. And he says that the criteria for marriage is not sex or household chores. It is love and respect. The criteria, but consider the climate. Verse 8. Now, to the unmarried and to the widows, I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I am. Paul is not encouraging or discouraging marriage. But in the climate where any and everything goes, in the climate where right on the hill there is a prostitute where people can go and have their fill of food, drink, and sex, Paul is saying that if you're going to get married, you ought to take in consideration the things that are going on in your society. And so you're going to get married, and you don't know that 1 in every 2 married in divorce. You're going to get married, and you are not aware that in every marriage there is inevitable conflict. In other words, just because you looking starry-eyed when you all get engaged don't mean that your whole life will be a blissful life. If you get married to any human being, that human being is imperfect and you are imperfect. And when 2 imperfect people come together, you are going to have some problems. So with that in mind, here are a few suggestions. Consider their family history. Do you know their families? Contrary to popular belief, when you marry that person, you marry into their family. And whatever their family is or is not, you become tied to that family. What are you saying, Pastor? I'm saying that when you marry that person, you marry their drunk uncle, their thieving niece or nephew. I wish I had somebody, their drug addict cousin. And if you are a woman, not only do you marry them, but you bear their name. And you don't have no questions. I'm talking about before you say I do. Their health history. Are they sickly and disabled? Not only physically, but have you considered a physical contract, a physical checkup? What are you saying? Where HIV and AIDS is on the rampage, it is being proliferated, especially in our community. More than half of the new cases of AIDS and HIV are in our community, and you're going to get married without the tests? Because you're in love? And all disabilities are not physical. I wish I had my gang here. Some of the disabilities are emotional and mental. I wish I had somebody. You don't know that they, I'm going to say it, crazy! They on medication, getting therapy, and getting a government check, and you don't know about it, and you about to get married? And it ain't until the day after the honeymoon, when you wake up late and discover that he's walking around the room with 3 different pair of sunglasses on, one on the front, one on the top, one on the back, with a raincoat on and some combat boots, because he's crazy. You mean you ain't got no questions? You get up and put your clothes on. Go off to work, forget something in your house, come back to your house and find him. I wish I could say it. This is a PG service. In your bra and your underwear and your high heels walking around your house. You ain't got no question. And now you're surprised if you're going to get married before you say I do, you better ask some questions. I'm not through yet. I got some more. Credit. Your credit score is 700. His is 350. I wish I had somebody. And everything that he owes, you owe. And whatever your standing is, his is. Because you're tied together. Previous relationships. How many times has she been engaged before? And how many times has he's been married before? And there are times when you enter a relationship, they get all emotional. I don't want to talk about that. Well, if you don't want to talk about that, you and I are not no longer a candidate for marriage, because in order for me to marry you, I need to know where you come from. And can I put a pin right here by telling you that whoever you marry has some history. And they may not tell you everything, but they ought to tell you something. Every time y'all start talking about previous relationships, you start crying, running the bathroom, slamming the door. I'll be here waiting till you get out because we're going to talk about it. I get so emotional when I start talking about my past. I know you do, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Children. You get married and you don't know how many children he has. And not only multiple children, but with multiple people. And so now not only do you have to deal with him, but you got to deal with all of us. I'm trying to get through this. Criminal. If he's a convicted felon, you ought to know about it. You don't know nothing about his criminal history, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning, the DEA kick in your door and shine a light and pull guns on your whole family, and you know nothing about it because you won't ask the question. Can I tell you that before you get married, you got to not only know the criteria, but you got to know the climate, because you might get almost anything. Thank you, Forrest Gump. Life is like a box of chocolates. The criteria, the climate, and then take your own temperature. Be honest about yourself. Does that person have spiritual intimacy with God? See, because once you marry them, it's too late for you to try to convince them or drag them into church or try to make them feel bad for not coming to church. Those are issues that must be addressed and settled. If you are a believer or a Christian or a regular churchgoer, you need to make sure and understand that that is understood before you walk down the aisle. Do you like to share? Be honest. Some things you might be selfish and stingy about. You don't want to share. If you're a single person, have your own home or dwelling, you don't want nobody else going in the bathroom messing it up after you've been in there. When you park your car, you know how much you got out to be there in the morning. When you deposited your check, you know what money is in your account because ain't nobody got access but you. Are you willing to share? And if you're not, you ought to ask or answer that question before you say, I do. Are you ready for a lifetime of full disclosure? To open your whole life to somebody else? I want to give a few wrong reasons and then a few right reasons to get married. Wrong reason. The fear of being left out or being left behind. The old maid syndrome. Your biological clock is ticking. Number 2, on the rebound. Somebody broke your heart, and now your childhood friend from 3rd grade has been asking you to marry him for 30 years, and you marry him and don't know nothing about him. Don't you think some stuff has changed since 3rd grade? The last one, wrong reason. Just because you're pregnant or you have impregnated someone, it's the wrong reason. And I know what our forefathers have said, but it's still the wrong reason, because a marriage does not rectify or clear up the problems in a relationship. If you got problems before, you're going to have problems after. Whether you're married or involved don't mean that you ought to get married. And parents, we ought to be careful to tell our young girls that they ought to get married so that it can save us the embarrassment. You didn't have the baby, she had the baby. We trying to cover our own reputation and we expose our children because of our own reputation. But pregnancy is no reason to be married. I'm almost through. Few of the right reasons. Adaptability and flexibility. Are you willing to adapt to change and be flexible? The laws of sameness. What do you have in common?